Welcome to the November Legislative Committee. I would ask for public comment. Rusty is the only thing we have looking like public. So I guess we'll just go into our reports. Legislative update. What's up?
I'm going to ask Rusty to give high-level updates.
Yeah, absolutely. Good. Great to be here this afternoon. Thank you for allowing me to be here and talk about it. There's been a whole lot of, so there's an old quote, never mistake motion for progress. And so there's been lots of motion in Lansing, but I'm not sure that we've made lots of progress. But just a couple of things that I just wanted to highlight that are movement in a good direction, but we're not at completion yet. So the first one is something that I think philosophically and certainly would meet with our agenda 4199 would eliminate the school start date restrictions. Basically, it would allow school to start anytime they wanted without waiver. That did pass out of House Education Committee and is on second reading in the House. I don't think they'll take it up before the end of the year, but it is in discussion. The other one is Senate Bill 664 that came out of Senate Education, and that is a bill that gives us flexibility on counting in the middle of a pandemic. And so that 75% challenge that we have with attendance and school funding days, that did pass out of the Senate 36-0. So, hey,
That's a good sign.
That is a good sign. Our challenge is that the House is a bit more adversarial about this particular issue, and particularly a few folks that want to sort of see how it plays out throughout the year before or even if they do anything. And so we're working with Chris at the ISDs and with other educational groups to try and just continue to bring this up with our House members and talk about the need for flexibility. And that it's sleeting outside today. If you have a school, you have 9 days essentially that you can cancel because of snow days or other purposes, right?
That's right.
We're at 15 or 16 days because we had a particularly bad winter or a particularly bad shutdown. It feels like we're going to be in a spot where we were a couple of years ago. We were going back to the legislature and begging for additional days. We've tried to come up with solutions that are creative and simple to say, why don't you give us some flexibility up front so that we're not sort of doing this dance in April and May and wondered about what's going to happen sort of with those finances. So the good news is the majority leader and the minority leader in the Senate are both committed to trying to get this done. The House is a tougher nut to crack. We're going to continue to keep working on it as we move through the year. I don't know 100% where GRPS has been in terms of having to shut down days yet, but there are schools who are starting.
Yep. It's
just starting to get cold. So we're going to hear, I think, more and more about this, and we're going to continue to communicate that with our legislators. And like I said, we're working closely with some of our partners on that.
Did you hear that there's been a 30% increase in COVID for kids just within the last week?
Mm-hmm. That would not surprise me at all. I mean, I get an email from Forest Hills Eastern every time there's a student, because I have a student there. And I've definitely gotten more letters in the last 2 weeks than I did in the previous month. Mm-hmm. So we'll have some challenges on that. Now, sort of, those were the highlights. Now for the lowlights. We've got a couple of bills that were sort of aimed at critical race theory. One is sitting on the Senate floor, Senate Bill 460, and then Senate Bill 5097 passed, 55-54 in the House along a strict party line vote. Obviously, those are not being signed by the governor, but their passage isn't necessarily useful for good dialogue and for getting
What do the bills say? That it has to be taught or shouldn't be taught?
So the House bills basically say you can't talk about racial or gender stereotypes as part of the curriculum, in a way that is, I'm trying to think of the word. I mean, it doesn't say CRT, but it sort of tries to describe what CRT instruction might look like, and then prohibiting that. And I think it's a 5% general fund or a 5% foundation allowance hit.
I'm not sure which one I read, but it sounded like what I read was, like you said, it was an attempt to capture what they think CRT says, and then keep it from occurring in schools. But the fact is that most of what they doesn't actually happen in schools anyway, because we're not actually teaching CRT. So they're kind of outlawing something that doesn't actually exist.
Exactly.
Yeah, it might be kind of hard to teach English class without talking about stereotypes once in a while, you know?
Well, yeah, but the language I read wasn't
Yeah, I was trying to.
quite like that,
I was
that you
trying to
couldn't
look at
teach
it.
about, but it was basically because it was outlawing CRT and we don't do CRT, it didn't seem, there weren't that many things that seemed to overlap with what actually happens in the schools. But
Right,
it
and-
did seem to, the concern part is that it was the legislature deciding what can be taught. That part is concerning, just in general, because it really shouldn't be. All,
Yep,
I mean,
stimulates that-
if they want local school districts with parental impact to communicate what we teach, then they wouldn't be deciding what that is in Lansing.
So the one that passed the House, the phraseology is to stipulate that no form of race or gender stereotyping could be included in core academic curriculum developed by the State Board of Education or by school districts. So that's the language.
Which means that you can't teach stereotypes of racial groups.
Right.
Is that something that happens?
That's why I'm saying,
Right.
that's why when I read it, I was like, well, we're not doing that anyway, so why
Well,
should
yeah,
we?
but you do, when you do literature, there's stereotypical characters all the way through, you know? And some of them, you know, I mean, even Joe, or not Joe, who was he?
Well, yeah,
Huck
like
Finn, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
That's the stereotype of the black man at that point, and then, you know, so you do talk about stereotypes. You talk about stereotypical rednecks in, you know, To Kill a Mockingbird. So, you know, I mean, that is a
I
English.
guess it depends on what teaching stereotypes mean. I would imagine you're not teaching,
And I would think that would be
introducing
dis-
stereotypes to them to use.
And even in that conversation would be dispelling those stereotypes
Right,
that come up versus teaching stereotypes
So that's why I
directly.
think that,
That's pretty wrong.
that's what, when I read that, I was like, I don't think that this is gonna,
Yeah, they won't get signed. This is, you know, this is all signaling and
Just something to make-
political posturing.
Yeah, for sure. Then there were the scholarship bills that passed. Both the House and the Senate were vetoed by the governor. 687, 688, 5404, and 5405. This essentially allowed for a tax-deductible contribution to a nonprofit that then could be used for scholarships or other educational training to entities that include private or public schools. Many in opposition feel like this is a subtle way to try and get over the ban on
Vouchers.
vouchers.
give me an example of how that would work. I'm trying to figure that out.
So let's say that the the foundation, public or a Christian school would start a foundation. And parents could give tax-deductible contributions to the foundation. The foundation could then use those funds as scholarships for kids to come to their private Christian school. So essentially, the dollar figure isn't necessarily big because you're only getting your state tax deduction. It's not, it's not huge money, but the signaling of it is that we should be able to have tax-free dollars go into a foundation, which can then be used to specifically for education for those purposes.
Has this law been passed by approved by either the House or the?
Both the House and the Senate
So
passed the
they're
bills
just-
and the governor vetoed it.
And now they're gearing up for a potential
Right.
petition drive to put it on the November ballot.
So, and the reason that the petition drive is important is that the level of requirement to get that petition on the ballot is 340,000 signatures, which isn't as many as, it's not as difficult as you might think it would be if you have $1 million. It's pretty easy, actually. And the way it would work is it's an initiated law, and that initiated law would either come to, so you get the signatures, it then is presented to the legislature, and the legislature has three choices. legislature can reject it and it goes to the ballot. They can accept it and it becomes law without the governor's signature, or they can amend it and put both the original and the amended one on the ballot as competing ballot initiatives. So this has been used a couple of times on a number of things, including right to work. In order to do it, they've announced, they've put in language to the Bureau of Elections, which is essentially identical to the bill language, and they would, they would be able to do this before new office holders took place in 2023. So, and then the last one that I just wanted to mention, there is a considerable number of bills, 380 through 383, which in the Senate, which would deal with dyslexia and sort of increased screening, including a universal screener for dyslexia. There is the statewide education associations have been opposed and have been working with the sponsor on sort of changes and thoughts to that. I'm not sure that they've gotten to a point where the statewides are comfortable with it. We represent a benchmark assessment company who also does dyslexia screening. Our folks are obviously concerned about one screener, that everyone would have to use the same screener. But from a school district perspective, there's a lot of concern about, I had this conversation this morning, if I have a challenge with my foot, I normally will go to my primary care doctor, and he will then look at me and say, okay, you should probably go to a podiatrist and sort of do that. You don't have the podiatrist come in and screen everybody in the waiting room to see if they have any foot issues at the primary care doctor. And so the way dyslexia, from what and again, this is a lobbyist point of view on dyslexia, so take it for what it's worth. But this is a medical diagnosis as well as a learning disability diagnosis. And you're trying to assess and come up with those markers and those concerns so that you can then dig deeper into it as a way to do it. And I think there's a local control issue here too that schools would be concerned about in terms of how you as a school district find those kids who have reading difficulties and dyslexia problems and then deal with them.
So how do we do that, Dr. Roby? How do we assess dyslexia in that?
So to be honest, I didn't think that we were, because I know we had moved away from it at one point. We did assess it back in like the early 2000s, but we kind of have moved away from assessing it, and it turned it back to a medical diagnosis. So this is news to me.
Yeah, I don't know what we do with this. I'd like to have more information. I have the impression that there's a lot of undiagnosed dyslexia in this district. And I also know that my son was diagnosed, but it was and he was diagnosed because I was like on the school board and was able to find out every information that was possible to find out about the fact. And I learned that I was not going to learn about how to fix it in this building. I had to go somewhere else, and I wasn't referred to go somewhere else. I just found somewhere else. And I think that, I don't know where things are at today.
Let me look into that.
Because I think that.
I don't think that, the last
I kind of got
time.
that sense from the previous director of special ed that it was almost like asking about lead paint in the house you're selling, It's just like an understood rule that we're not going to talk about it. It's been painted over, because nobody's going to spend the money to get rid of it. And I had that sense with dyslexia here. Those are strong words I'm using, but I do get the sense that the motivation may be that there's a lot of undiagnosed dyslexia that impacts the ability to learn and certainly the ability to read. And we just don't know how to assess it.
Dr. Baker, how did you come to that place of knowing there was a concern with your son?
I kept sitting in meetings with special ed, not figuring out what was wrong. And so then I found out through the community that there was that I could go to a doctor because I had good health coverage, go to a doctor who medically diagnosed it. But I actually did talk to the director of special ed and got the impression that I was not going to figure it out. from the staff that was at the district. But I had to find out somewhere else, so.
I guess my question is, even prior to talking to special ed, what was the issue with your son?
Well, he
learning?
wasn't reading.
Okay, so that's what I'm saying.
He's
As
like
a-
in 4th and 5th grade and not reading, so, which, so that was an issue, so. He would score, in the bottom 10% on the MAP test, and, we're trying to figure out, well, what is it that keeps him from, I think that, but I was someone with a lot of resources, and
It makes a big difference.
so, but I would imagine a lot of families wouldn't. So basically, you just keep sending the kid to school. I sent him to school it wasn't until middle school that we got him diagnosed. It took 3 years.
So we're expecting to see substitutes, which we've been sharing, and we'll have we can have more conversation based on that. It's not gonna move before the end of the year. This will be a next year conversation. That obviously, the district's in terms of its choice to weigh in, but we'll make sure you have the best information to be able to weigh in on that stuff, should you guys choose to, so. That was, I just wanted to give you a overview. That's sort of some of the issues that have been sort of percolating in Lansing. It hasn't been as much about funding, obviously. There are some there's about $1 billion in excess in school aid funds because of all the things that have happened, and I suspect that there will be more of a surplus in those funds based on sales tax and some of the other things we're hearing about rebates on auto insurance or other things that are, significant in number enough to add $100 or $200 million to the school aid fund. So.
I will
We were talking
follow
about
up with.
CRT when we
I will
came-
follow up with our special education director just because I don't know about the dyslexia.
And it has been years, so I don't know
Yeah.
where it's at now, but it seems like it's a.
I know it
pretty
had
big-
moved to a medical diagnosis at one point, but
Yeah.
you're right, it's about reading and,
Yeah.
and so I don't know why it went to the medical
Yeah, I
side.
think that even we have Vision to Learn in here, and they do
Yep.
medical exams for
Yep, we
students
met
to
with
see if
them
they-
yesterday and we talked just about
Yeah,
that.
it's a great organization, and they discover medical problems which they fix by giving them glasses. It's kind of a similar thing, especially since it ends up impacting our performance as a district. So,
Now, may I ask, I sort of missed that conversation. There is no legislation now about critical race theory that's in the works that is seriously being considered?
There is. 5097 is that more generalized, it doesn't say CRT, talks about gender and racial stereotyping. That has passed the House and is in the Senate Education Committee. Senate Bill 460 is on the Senate floor. That was passed out of Senate committee and is on the floor, but has not been acted on the floor. The governor has signaled in every way possible that she would veto that. But again, as we tell our kids, words matter. And debate has an impact on things. And so those are both going on right now.
Are there any other questions, comments?
That's it. That's all the stuff that's happening. Actually, the first two, since you started with, which was positive, does that have any opposition? They eliminate the school start date.
Yeah.
It does have opposition.
Most the tourist industry is opposing that, particularly in northern Michigan.
And how does that impact-
Ironically, I worked for the state representative who actually passed the legislation for the
John Small.
post-Labor Day school start. That was almost 25 years ago. So it was a post-Labor Day school start, and the decision for when school start was based on the tourism industry, not on the academic needs of students. And so the fact that this legislation passed, you said unanimously, right?
No, that was the other
No,
one.
that was, sorry.
This is on second reading on the House
Yep.
floor.
Yeah, so,
And the chairwoman of education is in this particular instance, is a huge supporter of sort of local control. The school district should be able to start when they want.
So I guess then is it likely to pass or at least move forward to be?
They may have the ability to get it through the House. The Senate, I think, the tourism industry may have a bit more of a ability to hold things up in that respect. I think they're trying to get movement to try and get some sort of compromise. Although I don't know exactly what our schools are, but I think, doesn't the whole county have a waiver?
Yeah, the waivers are so easy to get at this point that it's, it's almost irrelevant to need legislation, but it's just the fact that we've got to go that extra step to get the waiver when it should just be a local control thing, and it's because there's a state law that mandates a post-Labor Day school start.
Definitely.
How long has that been on the books?
When did you write it, John?
98, 99. So 22 years.
Was it? Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. 'Cause it was
Yeah, when John
That's
does
before I
something,
came to work for the
It
chamber.
John does
lasts.
something, it lasts, so.
And it usually has big impact.
For the record, that was a constituent relations, not the legislative aid.
Right, exactly.
And the flexibility on the pandemic student count, is that likely?
We have a pretty big obstacle in the House in the appropriations chair. And so we're going to continue to try and work through that. I'm sort of the opinion now, you need to make a steady drumbeat of what the challenges are and making sure the legislators have the information about what's going to happen. But we're going to end up in April and May trying to get a bill passed to forgive 6 extra days. I just think that's where we're going to be. There doesn't seem
It's
to be.
not like they can, if they wait too much longer, nothing's gonna happen.
Yeah, and it sounds to me like they're gonna wait until we get through winter to see
Right.
what the numbers really were.
Yeah, if the number's at 8, then they would say, well, we don't need to do it.
We don't need it because we have up to 9 days.
Right. And all we're saying is, there's 6 automatic, 3 you
Three
can
from the
request. Can you give us 3 to 5 more just in case? It's not like that complicated. But I think we're gonna be in a position, but I think it's incumbent upon us, i.e. on this side of the table, to make sure that legislators know, okay, here's what's going on at GRPS. We were talking to Chris the other day, and they've already got, one of their schools up north was shut down for 7 days
Yeah.
already.
The whole district.
7 days. So all their free ones are gone,
Right.
before winter hits in the north. So,
Wow.
Not indicative of what we have to come down.
That was COVID related, or?
yeah, absolutely.
School outbreak.
Yep.
Remember, those smaller districts, they have like 2 elementaries, a middle school, and a high school. So
Right.
it doesn't take much, and with a concentrated population in
Yeah,
just
but
a few buildings
Shoot,
to
remember
cause
those counties
the
were
whole-
getting 20 snow days just 2 years ago,
Yep.
so.
The hard part though, even with that, because it's a smaller district, but it's like, no matter what, once you get to a point of you have more kids than what you have staff for safety,
Right.
then, and it's such a complicated issue, even in the sense of like when you start moving kids, then you lose that, the nesting. And so you're cross-contaminating, and sometimes it's just like calling it, saying, let's take a break to give people some time.
You gotta calm the situation.
Yeah.
When we have like individual school closings for short term, does that impact our days? That's not-
You have to have 75% positive attendance, district-wide, right?
District-wide, right.
Okay, district, not school-wide. Okay, that's good. All right, so it looks like you got a fun with
That's right.
maps.
This is, you're probably starting to see a lot more noise in the media about the legislative redistricting. So I asked Rusty if he could come in and try to make some sense of this. It's got a little minute to go, but there's a lot cooking. So I'm as excited to see this presentation as hopefully you are.
Yeah,
'cause
definitely.
I've been
This is
monitoring
the
it.
first PowerPoint I've ever done, so yeah, we'll see how it goes.
What?
Not a PowerPoint person. So redistricting in Michigan, citizens, so the key takeaways, citizen committees can be messy, particularly when you have prohibitions in who is on that commission, could really have no connection with a lobbyist or a legislator. So you have folks who really have had no political engagement who are now in charge of drawing all the lines. That's not good or bad, that just is, and you're just gonna have more challenges that come with it. The maps are likely to have their day in court, either the Supreme Court or the federal court. We can get into that in a minute. And then both the House and the Senate majorities will be more competitive based on with those lines. the goal of the Redistricting Commission really was to, from the language of the petition, it was to reduce gerrymandering. Gerrymandering obviously is drawing the lines for the advantage of one party over the other. The goal was to keep communities of interest together so that there weren't splits, but also to have a more closely aligned partisan breakdown in the districts and in the makeup of what the House and Senate might be. Sort of overarching in this was when you have a bunch of 58% districts, either Dem or Republican, you then tend to get legislators who only cater to their base because that's all they need to do is win the primary. So the idea behind it was if you have more districts that are 52, 53%, where the general election is closer and more, and the outcome is not known, then you may have a more moderate governing style because of the people that you will get elected. I think that's the overarching theory, and I think there's some
Or at least more moderate, but more inclusive too.
there's some validity to that. The question becomes coming up with that number and drawing that can be very, very complicated. And I think what we've seen in some of these maps is they look funkier, that's Rusty's word, than some of the previous maps. In terms of, we always use
There were
this-
some funky maps.
Right, we always used the shape of the district, right, to say whether it was gerrymandered or not. And I think this is showing us that maybe the shape isn't the biggest issue as much as the population that's within that shape, if that makes sense. Just a little census data, just to give you growing counties. Obviously, Kent County was growing, Ottawa County grew in a big way. Some sort of loss, most other places, really West Michigan was the place where there was the most gain. Oakland County, some areas down in southeast Michigan. Takeaways, West Michigan, Traverse City, UP, Detroit, Flint, and the minority population in Michigan rose by 4%. Previously, the legislative plan was adopted by the House and Senate, signed by the governor. There was legislative negotiation that went on. There was a strong consideration for who was currently elected and whether or not you had people having to run against each other. All that stuff went in. It was guided by APOL standards, which essentially said you have to have as few county breaks as possible, and there were 4 or 5 other standards that you had to meet in order to do that. The redistricting constitutional amendment replaced those standards with a new sort of order of priority. So you've got currently the adopted 2018, 9-5 on the Congress, and 58-52 in the red. That's how they were drafted in terms of what their partisan makeup was in there. Obviously, the congressional one will change because we've lost a congressional seat. Now we're down to 13 rather than 14 seats. The historic performance on the Senate under these maps that we currently have, you have 22-16, a tighter majority in 12. 16 was obviously a pretty big Republican wave, 27-11, and then this year that number is wrong. I apologize. It's 22-16, not 26-12. Sorry. The House, same thing. You've got the partisan breakdown based on that. You see in 14 and 16, there was a large wave, and that was reflected in terms of who got elected in the House and the Senate. This was passed by 61% of the voters. It created the Redistricting Commission, and then they're in charge of doing all of the redistricting for the state. It's 13 members. They're randomly selected from those who applied. 4 Republicans, 4 Democrats. They're affiliated. 5 independents are unaffiliated. That will mean something later on in the presentation that we'll talk about. But essentially, those were the 13 people that are done. In order to get a map approved, you have to have 7 votes.
Sorry,
No, you're
turn it
fine.
off. I don't
No,
know.
that's all right. You have to have 7 votes, and you have to have at least 2 commissioners from each of the groups approve the plan. So essentially, you have veto power if, for example, for the Democrats, none of them would vote for a plan, then you essentially have veto power, and they would not; that map would not be approved. Here's some of the requirements that I talked a little bit about. Last 6 years, you can't be a declared candidate, an elected candidate, a political party official, a paid consultant or employee of an elected official, candidate or PAC, an employee of the legislature, lobbyist, unclassified state employee, and you can't be a parent, step-parent, child, stepchild, or spouse of any of those disqualified above. So you had a pretty large disqualification of who could be involved in that. So I talked a little bit earlier about order of priority. Districts, the first thing is they have to have equal population. I think there's a 0.5% or a 2% variation. You can go 2% variation either way. You obviously have to comply with the Voting Rights Act and any other federal laws. They have to be geographically contiguous. They have to reflect the population, disproportionate advantage to any political party. It doesn't matter if you're an incumbent or not. It shouldn't be a consideration, and shall reflect consideration of county, city, and township boundaries, and shall be reasonably compact. I always laugh when the law contains the word reasonably, because what's reasonable to you is not reasonable to me. Those sounds like attorney employment acts. Constitutional timeline, just to give you an idea of sort of what the proposed law was. We're obviously into November. The maps were supposed to be adopted. They have not been adopted. They're currently in their 45-day comment period. But December 31st, they were supposed to become law. Just to give you an idea of the timing for next year, April.
I don't know. I'm going to throw this thing away.
Don't do that. It's too important to do
You
that.
got some good music.
Yeah,
for you.
I
You
do.
got a
Yeah, I know.
different one for each
We
person.
get Fleetwood Mac next. So December 31st, the maps were supposed to become law. Just to give you a sense of timeline, the second week of April is the filing deadline for running for office. So you essentially have 3 months after the districts were done in order to apply for that. Like I said, just some stories that
Will
we-
this happen likely, the 31st?
Hell no. No way. No way. Again, there's some additional timelines.
Oh, wow.
In terms of what they were supposed to do. March 2nd, the maps do become law, and you're supposed to know by the end of the year what those maps are so that people can prepare to run or do the things that they want to do in order to be able to do that. Like I said, we're right now in the 45-day public comment period in order to, a comment period on the maps that they proposed. The requirement, as I said, you gotta have 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats, 2 independents, and then you've got to get 1 additional commissioner to vote for it in order to get a map adopted for each of the House, Senate, and the congressional lines. Each commission, let's say they don't get that, this is where it gets fun. So if they don't get a plan approved by 2 plus 1, then each commissioner is able to submit a plan. And of those plans, they are voted on and you rank them in the order that you think you like the particular plans that they have. If the highest ranked plan is in the top half of at least 2 affiliated commissioners, so remember, Republicans and Democrats are the affiliated ones. So if the highest ranking plan is in at least the top half of those 2, then that plan is adopted. If there's 2 plans and they're tied, it is a random draw of one of the plans. So if the top 2 ranked plans aren't in the top half of 2 affiliated commissioners, then there's a random draw of all the plans.
So that's,
So make it even
that's
worse.
after December 30th.
No, this would be after, let's say we get to the end of the comment period, Tony.
Right.
And no map is, they can't get the votes for
They can't
any
get the
map.
7 votes.
Yep, they can't get the 7. Yep, correct. Then they would go into this sort of dance to try and get there. So now, my suspicion is, it's fun from my side of the world to sort of talk about, to take this to its absurd end and think about the fact that you've got 13 plans in a hat or 13 marbles in a bag.
These are all cartographers, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. I think my favorite, and this is not to disparage the person who said this, it just goes to show how complicated these things are. They were going through the maps and they were in the thumb area. And the lady said, well, what if we just bring in Sarnia? Then that will make this, appropriate for what we're trying to do. Well, yeah. Someone pointed out that
That's in Canada.
that's Canada. You can't really do that.
Well,
So,
I mean, we should extend democracy.
We're friends. We're friends.
There's a bridge.
Right. Yeah, two of them. So anyway, so that's just some of the stuff that's gone on. So you can have a legal challenge through the Supreme Court. You could do the big. I don't want to get in my head. Well, I am going to get
But
it.
the court will kick, the state Supreme Court would have to kick it, but if it doesn't pass the legal muster, they still kick it back because the commission is the only sole authority to vote
Right,
on it.
exactly. But it depends on where you challenge the law. So for example, if there was something in the Constitution that they felt they violated, they would go to the Michigan Supreme Court. For example, the commission went into private session. The Constitution says everything has to be done in public session. The lawyers said, no, FOIA allows you to go into private session for certain things. Constitutional experts said, doesn't say anything about this being subject to FOIA, or Open Meetings Act, excuse me. Doesn't say anything about that. It says in the Constitution, everything has to be done transparently. I can easily see a challenge to the Supreme Court that it violated that, and if it did, it would, quote, have to start over. If you go in the other direction on the federal side, the federal law requires the Voting Rights Act that there has to be majority minority districts, and that is to ensure representation from minorities in a district, and that number is 50% plus one, according to what most say the standards are. So for example, in the city of Grand Rapids, you would have a majority minority district, and it would have to have at least a 50% plus one minority population to ensure that there was adequate representation. This has mostly played out in the city of Detroit, where the maps are drawn in such a way that they almost look like fingers coming out of the city, and you've got originally about 35% minority representation in districts, and the African American legislators in that area were raising concerns that you essentially were not going to have districts that would be represented by African Americans. You would go in the state Senate, for example, from 5 districts represented by African Americans in the city of Detroit to 1, based on the way the districts were, because they went out into the suburbs. And so there could be a challenge. Now they've altered those maps a bit, and I think they're up to like 40% or 44%, but historically it's been 50. So that could easily be a challenge in federal court. And again, I don't know what happens if the federal court strikes it down. Does the federal court then help write the plan? Because you're beyond the U.S. Constitution, or Michigan.
State Constitution.
Now you're at the U.S. Constitution. We can get this over to you if you want to sort of look at the maps. I can tell you, ironically, trying to look at these maps is painful.
Yeah.
Because the Redistricting Commission, designed to bring transparency to the process, has an electronic mechanism to look at maps that you can't understand for the life of you. It's terrible.
Yeah.
So the proposed congressional maps, these are the names of the different ones. This gives you sort of the partisan breakdown of each of those maps. All of these particular ones are 7-6. But within that, for example, Grand Rapids, some of them include Grand Rapids, Ionia, and Battle Creek. Other includes Grand Rapids and Kalamazoo, and that can change your partisan makeup from a 54% seat to a 53% Republican seat, right? Just, so within those plans, that 7-6 is different for different areas, depending on who would be the majority, or who would be the Republican and who would be the Democratic advantage in those. The Senate maps, as you can see, everything's 2018 or 1919. From the perspective of the commission, they will say that partisan fairness was the thing that they most focused on. There's some argument whether or not communities of interest is higher on the order of priority than partisan breakdown. And then the House, again, you can see the House has a little more sort of swing in terms of what it could be. Let's see. This is the Court of Appeals. Yeah, who cares? 45 days, December final maps adopted. Maps become law in March, maybe. All right. I think that's it. So, that's a lot. I hope it was interesting, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Rusty, you want to share a little bit, like, of the current drafts? For Grand Rapids, we have one Senate seat right now. We'd go to likely 2, I believe. It depends on the map, I suppose.
The city, yeah.
The city proper.
Yep.
Talk a little bit about
The city would have
specifically
influence
City
over
of
2
Grand
seats.
Rapids, our House seat, Senate seat. Because as I also understand it, that they would be not just inclusive of just the city of Grand Rapids. These districts are going to end up going out a little bit, kind of like they did in Detroit. So in theory, we could have our senator or reps that don't live in the city and have no connection to the city of Grand Rapids.
Yes. Yeah, and that again gets to, this is the push and pull between communities of interest and partisan breakdown, right? That's where this push and pull comes. And Grand Rapids is a prime example of that. I don't know all of the maps in terms of what they do for West Michigan, but essentially it is whether you split it at Fulton North, Fulton South, and then Kentwood and Byron Center are in a different seat, or you have that line a little higher and then the other line goes higher up into Montcalm, or you go a little lower and the line goes a little lower in terms of what they're able to do. But there's good and bad to that, right? If you end up with 2 or 3 senators that Grand Rapids is a part of their district, and you have a district that is closer to 50%, 50-50 than it is 58, either R or D, well then conceivably you would have to pay more attention and spend more time, and now Grand Rapids has 3 voices in the process as opposed to the one that it has now. If you have a higher percentage of R or D in those, and the senator isn't from the area, they may ignore the city, and then you don't, as
Right.
opposed to right now, you have one who lives in the city and is very committed to the city, right? So again, that is the push and pull that you can have. The benefit of growth in population is we're going to have more representation than we did before.
That's right.
The other side of the sword is, because the city's been split up, you don't have one person sort of dedicated to that, or 2 as you have now in the legislature. But again, it cuts both ways depending on who wins the election and who's in the majority.
And who shows up to vote?
The only thing I would note, and I think Rusty had this in there, but because this is going to be make more competitive seats, there's going to be that much more money put into these. So these, again, typically you've got your
10.
targeted top 10 seats
In the
where
House,
all
5
the
in the
money
Senate.
in the state goes funneled to those, and that typically determines the majority. Now you're going to have a lot more seats in play, and so you're going to see more money in this next election probably than we've ever seen.
More ads,
More ads.
more mailers, all that stuff. And again,
More special interests, and the only other thing I would add is that trickles down to school board and city commission as well.
This year, for
because
sure.
They're both on the November ballots. So we're anticipating partisan endorsements in the school board and in city commission races.
Well, yesterday when I was at the conference, they were talking about how school board races are now, because with all school board people, but school board races now are going to be people are going to pay much more attention to them, because the candidates are receiving, I didn't get any money from anybody, I just did it myself, but they were pouring all kinds of money into the people who probably would not agree with some of the things that we say, and if they take over those school boards, and it's a good possibility they will, because they'll have lots of money to spend on these people, and ordinary people running for the school board might not be there
Ordinary
anymore.
people have to be more connected to the partisan. So in this city, it'll be different, right? But it would still be,
Well, yeah, but you gotta think about all the other places that aren't like us, It make a very big difference for a lot of people.
everything that's done has some sort of unintended consequence over time, and I know that both parties are getting more involved in nonpartisan elections than they ever have before, and it's not even just on the election side, it's on the candidate recruitment side. Right, they're more trying to quote build the farm teams on both sides. So hopefully you found that interesting. It's fascinating to talk about and sort of watch.
I walked around Northeast Grand Rapids when they had the, what do you call it? Forgot the word. Petition. And I worked at Voters Not Politicians and walked around Grand Rapids getting names signed. And my granddaughter must have been in 6th grade because I took it with me every time I went to a volleyball game. And I found all the people in the stands to sign it, you know. I never had anyone say no. No one ever said no.
No, and you know, it's one of those things too. If you would have described the picking districts out of a hat, people would have been like, "Huh?" But redistricting and gerrymandering is not new. Like, it's happened. I mean, when you draw the lines every 10 years, the people who have power would prefer to stay in power. I always joke that there was a Johnny Carson interview with Ronald Reagan in the late 70s where he complained about all the Democratic gerrymandering around the country and how that had helped them control Congress for 60 years. And so, it's whoever's in power, the other side is like, well, you're just trying to stay in power. Well, the answer is yes.
Yeah, I'm sure it would be messy if this House and Senate and the governor were trying to come to an agreement.
Yeah, yeah.
Which is the alternative,
Yeah, and
right?
this is the fascinating thing about it because, I mean, this is my third redistricting. And it was always, going to the leader and saying, hey, can you help me make sure I get a Senate district that I can run in, that nobody else can run in? And now you've got districts where incumbents are going to be forced to run against each other because the commission doesn't care that, that you're going to have to run against your best friend sitting next to you who lives down the street from you. Because you were separated before and now you're not. And so it's just not a consideration. And I only bring that up to say, once these lines are finalized and you're going to have people running against each other, you're going to have complete political chaos and nothing is going to happen, right? Because you're going to be watching everybody else in terms of what they're doing, even in your own party, because the guy next to you or the gal next to you may be running against you in a primary for a seat that you've both already been elected. So it just, there are no easy solutions. They all create new challenges.
Okay, our legislative platform.
On that rosy note, thank you, Rusty.
Happy to help.
So you have a copy of the draft legislative priorities. We you might recall the conversation we had in September. So some of these are some of this is really not new. But let's start with just the front page. Wanted to bring back the guiding principles. This is something you might recall from a few years ago. We built these in to have guiding principles in the event that there is legislation that comes up that Rusty and myself or Chris Glass, we need to move a little more quickly. So we'd be able to use some of these guiding principles. If there's certain issues, for example, on local control, we can express our concerns if there is a local control issue. But just wanted to share, again, we've been consistent in looking to support the messaging around Michigan being a top 10 state, aligning around 3rd grade reading, 8th grade math, college career readiness. These are all aligned with formerly, and I'm already seeing an update because the West Michigan Talent Triangle has changed their name to Education Advocates. So I will make sure to update that on your guiding principles, assuming you approve these. And then, as our advocacy would be based on, it must be based on looking at the individual needs of students, reflect the individual characteristics of districts, and provide for the local control to implement evidence-based reforms. If you go to the back page, we have 6 proposed top priorities. These include the equitable and adequate funding to meet student needs. This has been consistent in your platform since as long as I've been here. But we tweaked it just a little bit more because we now because of the historic per pupil increase at $589 for us, that has now created parity in funding for the first time since Proposal A, and actually first time ever, because pre-Proposal A, there was even greater inequity between the highest funded and lowest funded districts based on the fact that funding was predominantly based on 75% local property taxes, which is where we created the significant inequities across the state. The legislature has now created this a set bar for the base per pupil foundation allowance. So we have parity now. Now is the time to really focus in on equity and adequacy, particularly around meeting the needs of our special ed learners, English learners, and our at-risk youth. And this is consistent with the Michigan School Research Finance Collaborative, the state legislature's adequacy study. We know study after study after study has said to meet the needs of our highest need, highest poverty students, our most at-risk youth, it requires more people, more intentionality, and in a lot of cases, basically more time, money, and people. So that's number one. Number two, and this is also consistent with what you've had around the need for a comprehensive educator and support staff talent strategy. We are in a historic staffing crisis, not just teacher shortage, it is across the board at every employee group we can think of. And so this is where we're looking, there's language you've had in there before about the critical shortage list, extending the sunset, expanding the list of teaching positions that would be eligible for the critical shortage list, allowing employees to substitute teach with less than 60 credits, suspending substitute teacher permit fees. We're trying to think about how do you take away as many barriers as possible. Establishing
What is that? What is that, John? That's,
the substitute teacher permit fee.
Yeah.
I don't know that exact.
It's $50.
It's $50. Okay.
and that means that if,
You have to
for your
register,
license.
apply for the license, and then they send you to a training that you have to go to as well.
and you have to pay $50 to do that.
Correct.
Yeah, that seems like, and that's a state requirement. Right?
But they're gonna make a lot of money substituting, so it's gonna
Yep.
work out good.
Huh?
They'll be making a lot of money substituting, so it will all work out. I'm being facetious.
It's half a day's pay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So our rate for daily sub is 115. I think, did we just bump it up to
120?
120 now? And that's 155
Give us that $5
for long-term
it makes
sub.
a
That's right.
difference.
That's right.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, but anyway, it's certainly, it just is counterintuitive. It's like a debtor's in prison. It's like, it's like people who need a job are gonna have to come up with money up front to get a job, so. When
Well,
we
and
need
so same
people-
thing
We
with
even
like,
had some questions on background checks.
yeah,
all that
that's
kind of
right.
stuff.
I mean, we were just having an email communication about what about fingerprinting is, $75, the individuals who are applying for $15 an hour jobs and they have to front $75. So we're looking at what we can do administratively. These are some ideas, and it's not limited to these ideas, but these are a few things that the education advocates of West Michigan have incorporated into their platform. So I want to emphasize that too. A lot of this language is 100% aligned with what Chris Glass and the education advocates are working on. Scholarships and student teacher stipends to recruit more people from colleges of education, school counselors, psychologists, and more. Creating alternative pathways for counselors, psychologists, social workers to receive certification. Those are just a few kind of ideas. This list could get really long. That's why we really have the key part is if we're going to look at this, it has to be a comprehensive approach to talent retention and recruitment and development.
It seems like this is, obviously adequate and equitable funding, but it seems like right now, this is the thing that is really harming. It's harming teachers, it's harming parents, it's just like, this is just huge. And plus, it seems like language that this legislature likes, support staff workforce development, they like words like that. So I don't know if it matters the order here, but it seems like this is our number one priority right now.
Critical shortage.
Yeah.
So one thing, I guess, we did this with the strategic plan. You remember we removed the numbering so that it didn't look like, hey, this is our number one, this is number two. So a couple options for you would be, one, we could simply eliminate the numbering and just leave them so that it's just, there's 6 platform issues, none of them's ranked. Or if you prefer, you could rank them and we can do it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
I think it matters what's effective, so it doesn't, I mean, I think that getting rid of the numbers might help because all of these are important.
I
But I
agree.
don't know,
I
Rusty,
agree.
if we say the most important thing is X and then second most important is Y, if it doesn't matter,
No, doesn't matter.
then
Some of it is there an opportunity, and if we can find an opportunity to get number 4, then today, number 4 is our number 1 priority.
Okay, yeah, that's,
Right.
I mean, that's effectiveness is what's most
Yep,
important.
absolutely.
So as an example, number 5 is one of those where, and we'll talk about it, but this is a long game here. The chances of us passing Headley rollback legislation we'd eliminate the Headley rollback is probably slim to none, particularly in a Republican-controlled legislature. So, but it's something that it's fresh in the sense that we just came off this, and it's an area that because of the consolidated elections, the increased cost of doing elections, we think that we need to start making some noise about this and see if we can get some traction. But something like that's going to get completely lost in the shuffle when it comes to the funding and then the workforce development.
That seems like a long-range education campaign rather than
Totally.
a lobbying effort.
Yep.
Yeah.
Even getting the statewide to focus in on this one issue is going to be challenging. The one thing because Mayor Bliss and City Manager Washington see this as an issue and concern as well, if we join forces with the City of Grand Rapids on our joint legislative platform, we might be able to make some waves and get some momentum built through the Michigan Municipal League and some of the other state associations. Third item listed here, COVID flexibility and stability on pupil accounting, educator evaluations, teacher and administrator evaluation. Oops, that's a duplicate. This is consistent with flexibility with ESSER funds and 31A funds. So the more we can use to dedicate those to where we believe it's needed most, having maximum flexibility to do that. Amending the pupil accounting rules for students in quarantine. This speaks to the legislation that was mentioned a little bit before. Is we need flexibility in pupil accounting. We need flexibility in, let's see a typo, on count day as well. We've already had a number of students enroll after the October count day. In fact, one of the students I talked with last night at the expo has not been in school yet this year. So they're already behind X number of months. They're coming to finally enroll with us. Yet we're gonna, that's also past the count day. So the original school's already kind of getting their funding from this. This is why we really need to look at how we can make sure we're accounting for and being funded for the students that we serve. And then here's that other temporary suspending the evaluations and the growth component for those evaluations. It's just the data that we have from COVID just is not it's not fair, valid, or reliable. And it's the concern is that's now up to 40% growth standard, and that based on where our students are, you can see quite a few teachers see their effective evaluation be negatively impacted, or highly effective negatively impacted.
Is this the right language to use for this? Because certainly a teacher will be evaluated as to whether or not they're doing a good job. It seems like when this came up last year, we were accused of getting rid of accountability standards. But what we're really saying is that we're shifting away from the numeric metrics that tend to be used.
So looking at, and this was language that you had in your COVID platform last year. So I kept that language, but looking at what Chris Glass has put together, he has language that says amend the teacher and administrator evaluation law to better meet the needs of educators by reducing burdensome requirements and making adjustments to the law. It will have a greater impact on learning environment. We could extend the time between evaluations for teachers deemed effective, suspend the component that requires the last 3 years of state assessments, allow the option for growth component to be calculated fully by benchmark assessments. Chris has some alternative language that I could easily incorporate if you would
That seems a bit
prefer.
wordy, but it still seems like, I would think that the legislature would balk at getting rid of any evaluation. Because then it looks like it's no accountability.
Yeah, we
versus-
did try to suspend it, and we had some support on the Senate side. We ended up getting sort of a lot of pushback on the House side. I remember we had a meeting with the chair
Yep.
on one of our Zooms, and, it was unproductive.
No, yeah, I remember that. Well, that was about the third grade reading log too, right?
Yeah, it was both. It was both.
Okay, and she was just like, this means, you mean holding people accountable to the law? Remember that? You got an argument with her. And I
Don't
was
worry
like, well,
about
no,
what's
it's
right.
like, we were just like, no, it's not that. The issue is that we can't, using the data that's required, that data is inaccurate.
Yeah, what we had said was we would do all of the tools, we would do all the interventions and all the things around those evaluations. And on the third grade reading, we just didn't want to actually have them be sort of high stakes for the folks. And so I mean, I'll just say to you, for what we're trying to do, I think this language works.
This.
Yeah.
What's written here
Yeah,
works?
Yeah.
And the language is specific to 21, 22 as well, so
That's kind
I
of,
think
that's
that
right.
goes
So
to-
what we're trying to say is, we're not trying to get rid of accountability measures once and for all. We're saying because of COVID, you've got to make adjustments because this is not fair, valid, or reliable. And we're saying once.
Did you say
once-
replace with local accountability measures?
That's a good idea. Okay, next one, so if I put on there, temporarily suspend teacher administrator evaluations, replace or rely on local accountability measures in the interim? Okay,
That way, anybody that asks, because even parent, I mean, I remember a close friend of ours, parent was like, that you guys are gonna get rid of it, and I was like, no, it's not like the principal, the superintendent is gonna find out whether or not the teacher's doing their job.
right.
It's just that the map data isn't
Right.
gonna be accurate, so we have to change that.
Okay,
Okay.
We probably need to then, for our staff, if that does happen, to kind of explain the local accountability measures would be formative, summative assessments, end of unit assessments. You can use other things that are kind of real-time data to see where students are.
okay.
Well, and the other thing is that's up to you.
I'm saying if we get asked, that's, yeah.
Yeah, you just say, well, this is the way we're doing it.
We do have a plan.
Yeah, yeah, you have a plan. I mean, you could do, stop by. I mean, whatever I don't think that we should prescribe what that is. It's just that there should be accountability and we trust you to do that, period.
Read by grade 3 law reform. This was, I believe actually the language we had was temporarily suspend mandatory retention. I saw that Chris's group is calling for elimination of the mandatory, so we could go either way. We could do for 2021, 22, temporarily suspend that. However, I think there's growing consensus that this mandatory retention is too punitive, and that while we built a lot of loopholes in it, there are actually not enough loopholes, so some students are going to get caught up in this. Rusty, do you have thoughts on this?
Yeah, this one is, we don't put them on here because they're easy or hard, but this one is near impossible.
Well, again, I remember last year with that conversation, we made it clear that we were not advocating to get rid of the law. We were advocating to suspend it till the data was reliable.
Right.
And I wouldn't want to, enrage someone that we need to help us.
So I'll add I'll change this to say temporarily suspend mandatory retention component of the read by grade 3 law for the 2021-2022 school year due to COVID.
Maybe if those maps work out better next year, we can come back at it.
Right.
Well, I kind of disagree with you, Dr. Baker. I think we should ask for the elimination. The fact of the matter is, we know it doesn't serve the purpose, and I think if it's not likely to be approved anyway, let's make the ask. Let's not, short stop it.
What if we did both? We said temporary suspend or eliminate.
I
That
like-
way we're saying,
Yeah.
we're eliminate or temporarily suspend the mandatory law.
Yes.
Oh, okay. That gets to that.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, because it is where we're at. I mean, on
Yeah.
that. It's just that, I mean, this is where I think that we need kind of advice, especially when we get to number 6, is that are we harming one set of our platform by advocating? I mean, where we're really at is this stuff here.
Right.
But we also want to have the right impact. So, I mean, I think that we need you guys and Rusty to just say, if we say eliminate, they're gonna be less likely
Yep.
to suspend.
Yep. So appreciate that qualification, because we've always been very intentional in how we play ball with our advocacy approach, knowing full well you have a Republican-controlled legislature that we've got to be able to play ball with if we want to get certain things done. And that's one of the reasons why we've effectively been able to get some surgical amendments and some things done that were to our benefit and maybe caused a little stir with the education lobby on occasion. But we need to be sent, because this sends a message and could actually help or hurt our advocacy efforts in both the short or long term, depending on where the majority is, who's the chair of the different committees.
And we evaluate our strategy every year, right? To your point, next year may be different, or the year after next might be different.
So just checking in, I want to make sure we want to do the temporarily suspend or eliminate. Okay.
Okay, so that's kind of our median drought here. That's as far, okay.
Okay.
And that's.
Because that at least opens up the door to say, well, certainly with COVID, we believe this needs to be suspended. But post-COVID, we've got to revisit this, because the unintended consequences that were part of that bill, which was how many years ago now when that law passed?
It's just like
5 years
they
ago.
worked on it for
How many-
forever. It
how
seems
many-
like it's been 10 years.
How many did we end up retaining this year?
Less than 20. It was a small group, and we made sure that families, we did outreach to the students who were directly impacted. We did communications, we followed up with our building principals, so that they could have conversations. And there were, and I won't even say, as I think about it, it may have been like 12. I know it was under 20.
Yeah.
And the few that were, 5 or 6 of them had moved out of the district, and so that letter would follow them because we had to do that. And there were a couple who had some issues around being identified for special education services, and so it may have made sense to do, but it was a very, very small percentage.
Yep.
And do we suspect that this year will be more because of changes?
Probably.
Okay.
We probably would need to look at our map,
Yeah. I think.
data, our fall map
just
data.
curious.
To see
Yeah.
where we're at.
One of the challenges, and then the unintended, is that while there is that kind of the parent has as written into the law,
The waiver.
they can say, yeah, no, I want my kid passed on. But that also assumes that they get the letter, they read the letter, they
They
follow through
understand.
with the letter, they
Yeah.
understand the letter, and
Which is
our-
why we did that's why we did the outreach, because we know that for many people, giving the information is one, and that's important, that's our due diligence. But that second layer to say, hey, this is what this means.
Yeah.
So,
Okay. Headley rollback, this is, you might recall, we had to do a non-homestead millage because property values are just skyrocketing. That would have automatically kicked in the Headley rollback, which means we would not have been collecting the maximum 18 mills. We would have been more at like 17.75 mills, which would have cost us about $250,000 annually. That also required us to put on the ballot, which it looks like the levy is up to, I think it was 21 mills is what we did this time around, when legally we can still only levy up to 15 or up to 18. And so the voter confusion, the costly elections, we believe this should be on the list of platform items, but kind of a little bit to Rusty's point, I think this is one for both 5 and 6 we need to talk a little bit about, is does this elevate to one of your top 5 or top 6 or top 3 priorities? It sends a message because we're fresh off an election. It's a talking point. We use these at our legislative lunch, which we'll talk about in a minute. So I'm more than comfortable keeping it on there, but I wanted us to have that discussion because there are a few of these things that, this one may take 10 years before we get movement on it. Thoughts?
I have a question then about number 6. It's my understanding that there has been legislation introduced in both the House and the Senate that would make it harder for some people to vote. And I can't see how we could ignore something like that. I just think that that's got to be one of the most important things we do. We have to have an educated electorate so they know who and what's going on, and not just here in Grand Rapids, but all over the state. And you know what's going to happen. You know what's going to happen. Look at Texas and Florida. Those places, I just feel so strongly about this, but have the same passion about climate change and all the other things. The good news for me is that I probably won't live to see all this stuff, so you can all settle it.
Mrs.
Oh, I'm
Lewis.
sure you'll be.
In 90, maybe? 90? No, I don't think so. But it's just so depressing. It's so depressing. And every time they talk about the John Lewis voting rights bill and, all of these things, it just breaks my heart because, I sort of lived through this the first time. I didn't do anything, just said, oh, yeah, that's a good idea. People should have voting rights. But this time, I want to be a little more proactive about it.
Well, and what's being proposed would directly impact our constituency. So the families that we serve, this community that we serve, even your mission, within the mission, to ensure that all students are educated, self-directed, and productive members of society. Upon graduation, students will be, among others, it says, productive and therefore able to actively participate as productive members of a democratic society. So I think there's justification for it. I just thought it would be important for us to have a conversation about, because this kind of gets to, you might remember, we had the 11-page legislative priority list, and we decided we wanted to narrow it down. This right now, because this is relevant and it's moving right now, I think we can more than justify keeping it, but I again wanted to make sure we had at least had that conversation, because it can be a slippery slope. We start adding, you referenced environmental justice. I mean, this list could start to get much longer than it is and start to stray maybe a little bit more from your typical education, appropriations and advocacy.
And I understand that. I do understand that, but I just feel that this is probably the most important kind of legislation that we are facing right now. They can talk about critical race theory and they can talk about equity and all these kinds of things, but if we do not have voting rights, we will have all kinds of legislation telling us what we're going to teach and what we're not going to teach, in whose books we can read and whose books we can't read, whether they've won the Nobel Prize or not. And
Okay.
There's also a strong argument to be made that voting rights is what increases the effectiveness of local control, because you have more people voting on local control. So I think you can make that argument in justification pretty easily. The only thing that I would caution folks on is there seems to be a sort of two very distinct arguments. Either nothing should be done on elections at all, or everything should be done to elections. And there are some things in the middle that you may be able to find bipartisan support on. And so as we talk about this, it may be, supporting the growth of people being able to be involved in elections, and making sure that anything that happens is bipartisan in how it happens. Because, for example, one of the things that some folks are pushing is the pre-processing of absentee ballots before an election. That giving more pre-processing allows for a quicker turnaround in terms of the result, which limits the ability for conspiracy theorists to say why something bad happened, right?
Right.
And as you have more absentees, so there are some things that you can do to increase that participation. So as you're sort of out and about, and we're sort of having these conversations, it's just important to acknowledge that any election system can get better. And the election system is evolving in that pre-process, early voting. If they propose 2 Saturdays of early voting, I think we would say, yes, that's a good thing.
And the last thing I heard too is that they want not to be able to send absentee ballots out. Like you have to come up with a reason or something. Well,
Well, you have no reason absentee. The question is clerks and the Secretary of State are just
Should they send
sending applications to
Without
everybody.
them being requested.
Right, without them being requested. That's
Well,
the issue.
See, I don't, what's wrong with that? If you don't want to vote, don't fill out the form. What's the issue with that? I don't understand that. To me, it's just another way to,
It's participation.
yes.
Some argue it's cost argument, it's cost
Oh, yeah,
argument
we
for
worry
both
about
ends.
money.
Yeah, so I get it.
I just spoke with the guy at Peter Meyer's office and asked, why did he vote against a bipartisan piece of legislation, this infrastructure? And the response I got was, it's too close to the Build Back Better. That is not even an argument. But that's the kind of people we're dealing with.
Can I ask a question just back on third grade reading? And again, just thinking about this as we sort of work through this down the road. It would be interesting to see how the kids who got a waiver who weren't retained, how they're doing.
How they perform this year.
How they performed. And again, that may be something where we can show, because what our commitment was, we were gonna do all of the things that third grade reading, if they were retained, would require us to do for those kids. And so it would be interesting if we end up with these fourth graders who have improved, we can come back and say, they got the waiver, we did exactly what we said we were gonna do, and we had good success. And so, understanding that takes staff time, and I get all that, but there may be some value in just sort of looking at how they did for those
That's a good
that
point, yeah.
give
That
it-
is a really good point.
Yeah.
And it's not a matter of, it's
Yeah,
data
we should
that
be
we're
doing
able
that
to-
anyway, so
Yeah.
it probably are.
But it would be
So-
nice, but if we
yeah.
could sort of pull that particular core group out and sort of see how they did, and if we see that they all did better,
Well, and also, I wouldn't want to pit these kids against each other, but it would be nice to know what's happening with the third graders that were retained, We shouldn't say that the fourth graders are doing better than these 23rd graders, because obviously our job is to get them to read. So,
Right.
but it would be nice to know
and you have much
what
more
the
extreme,
impact
yeah,
is.
and you probably have much more extreme factors in the kids
Yeah.
that were retained
Yeah.
than those fourth graders who went on. So, just a thought.
I'm sending it to the team to see if we can get something next week. Because it's a matter of just pulling it. That's not too challenging.
And that's all we have proposed.
So I think that in terms of, all three of these we discussed for extensively, had a good sense of what the rollback is, protect voting rights. This language works. I think it's when it comes to, specific legislation, whether we support or oppose.
How you interact on
But
it.
that's the same conversation we had earlier about whether or not we should get involved in the CRT discussion, is whether or not we can impact it, what is it really about, and then we can make a decision as a group when those things happen.
Part of this is pushing, we have statewide associations for a reason.
Yeah,
And sometimes they should, take the lead on some of these issues, and we can take the lead on some issues. But having something like this in the platform allows you to have a conversation with the Administrators Association or the School Board Association or the secondary school principal, all of those, to have them weigh in, and that there's districts that are concerned about this. It all goes towards,
Well, I'm on the legislative committee for the Michigan Association of School Boards, and next week, Friday, we're having a meeting, so we will be discussing this.
I have a feeling that you will. But I think that, again, it gives us, if somebody says, well, what does this have to do with number one? It's like, well, we're about empowering our students to have a voice. And so, in their community, and we feel like this is connected.
and it fits in with local control.
Yeah, so that's an easy one, so. Okay, legislative luncheon and Capitol Day.
February 4th is our lunch. We're doing it at.
But wait, actually, do we need to take any action on this going to the full board?
So I was a little confused by what Julie said earlier, because as I recall, you've typically said.
Right here.
Yeah, okay, sorry, I didn't realize you were back there. She said something about how the committee doesn't vote, but in years
No,
past, we've always
that's not what
voted.
she meant, though. What she meant is that our vote isn't the final word.
Correct.
We
Okay.
vote to send
Okay,
things to
yes,
the
so
full
yes, we
board.
would like formal action on this platform.
So, can I get a motion?
As amended.
As amended, can I get a motion to send this platform on to the full board?
So moved.
Support.
Okay, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Oh, we got it.
February 4th is our legislative luncheon. It's just before the budget comes out. We'll have a better idea of what the lines are and who's going to be running and all that sort of fun stuff. So we just thought that that was the best time to be able to do it. I think we talked about highlighting some kids and some good stuff that's going on at the district when we did the luncheon.
Yeah, we thought that if we think about how, with your strategic plan, empowering, uplifting student voice, that we could, at minimum, get the student board reps to play a role in this, maybe get students from the Superintendent Student Advisory Council to help play a role in advocacy. It would very much change things up from our norm. And I think we really like the idea of
I think that's
really
great.
bringing students forward.
Yeah, I have it on my calendar, and so we would, and as an in-person, we would hopefully be in person and invite the kids. That would be great.
That's correct.
Do we have any idea where, or that's up in the air yet?
Probably GRPS University. It's got the most space, but we could choose to do it at a school. We've done that before, where we can do school tours. The only issue there is we're really trying to keep the schools focused and not bringing a lot of people in from the
Right.
outside. So,
Good
And
idea.
with COVID,
and with COVID,
Yeah.
yeah.
right, makes sense just to do it separately.
And we will likely have, well, we could possibly have the same, but we will likely have a different legislative committee at that time.
Oh,
But
that's right.
just So
She'll
we
have
need
new
to make sure
leadership.
that's
Yeah.
communicated. Because we would reorient that in January, so.
Yep. And
But
then,
it's
of course,
possible
the
that four of
capital
us could
day,
be-
the capital day was to be determined, but we were looking somewhere, I think you said
After April.
after April, after spring break.
Yeah, it'd be nice, maybe by then we can do it in
Yep.
person instead of.
Yep, that's what we're hoping. And that's all we have for you today.
Thank
All
you.
right. Then I guess meeting is adjourned.
Great, it's a good way to wrap up Friday.